Different voices speak to people in ways that individual can understand. You might read 4 different authors talking about the same subject, but one of them is going to set you on fire. So when people say, there've already been 20 books written about this, like, you haven't written one. Somebody's going to identify with you. Maybe all the other books were written by 35-year-old guys who had a certain degree, but you are a 27-year-old single mother who didn't finish your degree yet. You're so freaking brilliant. You went out there, you invented this app, and you're doing marvelous things.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. I love a good story. Sometimes that means reading about other people's stories in books or creating stories of my own out there in the real world. For today's episode, I traveled south and met up with ghostwriter Maggie Mills in a most unexpected location. Maggie's the most famous author you've never heard of, and we discuss writing, the best way to start writing your own story, and how she helps her clients get their stories out into the world through publishing books. Before we begin, though, I'd like to thank the author John Berendt for the story he published 30 years ago that caused this whole thing to come together the way it did. Maggie Mills, thank you for being here on this joyful rebellion. It is fun.
This is so much fun.
And we really do have a story within a story that was all caused by a story. I first want to just rip the Band-Aid off with anyone listening and get it out of the way. You're a ghostwriter.
Yes. Hello, my name is Maggie, and I'm a ghostwriter.
The thing is, when I tell people that, they think you write ghost stories, and that's not the case at all.
Some people do have that. Although I have written about the dead, but that's not really what a ghostwriter is. It works its way in there sometimes, especially when you're writing true crime. They're bound to be dead people.
Sure.
In the interesting crimes. Yeah.
Yeah. With those, it wouldn't be much.
We don't
the story
write about the
wouldn't go
dull
far.
crimes, no. It was an accounting error, I swear.
So we have our own little joyful rebellion going on right now, right where we're sitting. And I'm curious, if you were going to write this opening scene, how would you write what's happening right now, where we are? Because for all anyone else knows, they might hear a bird chirping, but they may not know what we're doing, where we're going. I do most of these interviews on Zoom. We are not on Zoom right now. Not at all.
No, we are on a stone slab, actually. I met this complete stranger. He emailed me, and we decided to meet in a cemetery. And I thought it was a great idea. And we are sitting on a stone slab on the grave of a poet.
We are on, this is his grave. He had his gravestone made into the shape of a bench, Conrad Aiken.
And we are here by his invitation. So the dead do speak to us. And he spoke to us Friday night.
Yes, he did. Oddly
enough, yes. So I'm sitting here, and you're no longer a stranger because we're having too much fun.
We've already had martinis. I guess spoiler alert.
That's okay. No
shouldn't
one saw that coming anyway. So
yeah, that was a left turn, wasn't it?
It's 10 a.m. The sun is shining. We're in Savannah, Georgia, drinking martinis, as one should.
On a Monday.
On a Monday. Who drinks martinis 10 a.m. Monday? We do.
This is what a joyful rebellion is all about.
So. Let's go to a cemetery and drink and discuss profound things.
Yes, indeed. And this all came about because of a story. I reached out to you because a lot of people I talk to would love to write a book. They have a great story in them. They just don't know how to get it done. You know how to get it done. Then when I reached out to you to say, I think this would be really interesting as a podcast episode, and you did a little light stalking, which is great. I appreciate that.
I call that professionalism. You call it stalking.
Tomato, potato. You said, hey, I noticed in your bio on your website, one of your favorite books is Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. which is totally true. I've read it probably 4 times now. I have been to Savannah so many times to see some of the things that fascinates me because it was based on a true story. I think it was glammed up a little bit. But
yes, you've spoken to some of the people who know the behind-the-scenes true story. But
yes,
let's never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
I like that.
I didn't come up with that. I think it's an Irish proverb.
Okay, I love it.
But I don't know.
It's so true because it's one of those stories that they were real people. You can go to the real places. You can see the things and almost experience it a little for yourself. But it was such an over-the-top story. And one of the main places at the end of the story is Bonaventure Cemetery. And you said, you know what? I live near Bonaventure Cemetery. Would you like to do the podcast episode there? And I said, hold your beer. I'll be right there. Actually, in this case, hold your martini.
Be right there.
I will be right there because it's even in the book where Conrad Aiken, whose grave we're sitting on right now, by invitation. I need to say that again.
We're not being rude.
No.
This was his idea.
He actually left it in his will that people should be encouraged to come have cocktails, specifically martinis, is what he and his wife used to do when they would come out here and sit on lawn chairs for several days during the week, have martinis. And I will say, it's a beautiful view. I'm looking at all the Spanish moss oaks. We've got a perfect view of the river from here. You maybe catch this little breeze that's happening. Azaleas are blooming all around us right now, but also camellias, dogwoods. I mean, we're spoiled.
Don't you love how the Spanish moss waves in the breeze? It's at once beautiful and macabre because if one were to rise up out of the grave, they might be draped in that. And I think it's beautiful, which is one of the reasons. What is the word? Tapophile? People who like cemeteries?
Did
we
hear
need to
him
look that up. Yeah.
Yeah, we did
verify.
did that tour, and he said that word. I need to look that up to pronounce it right.
Yeah, we'll put it correctly in the show notes.
Yes, we will.
There's something beautiful about cemeteries. In many cases, if people live in the city, graveyards or cemeteries, and we know the distinction, it's not just about dead people. It's about beautiful landscaping and quiet environments and a respite from busy life, an homage to the dead, and a reminder that we're not the one under the dirt.
Yes.
So what is depressing to some people is uplifting to others.
I talk about that a lot because it's true. Sometimes when I talk about the fact that we've got a lot to get done because I'm not going to be around forever and we don't know. It could be tomorrow. It could be 50 years from now. Not sure. But we know one thing for sure.
I've got 48 to go, if I've done my math correctly. I promised my son I was going to live to be 100 and that we will have a 100 yoga day challenge for my birthday. I plan to still be doing yoga at 100.
Okay. I'm sure
You're invited.
Thank you.
There will be martinis.
I will bring martinis for sure. And I have to say, this is my very first martini ever. And the first sip, I wasn't so sure. I wanted a margarita pretty bad. But I think on the third sip, I'm warming up to it. And maybe my standards are just getting lower.
Literally
I don't know.
warming.
Yeah. It did feel nice on this 50-degree morning. Yeah. Let's talk about stories because everyone has stories, but stories are life. Life's just a collection of stories as you go through. Like right now, we're creating a really fun story. Sometimes you go through a period in life where the stories, they're not so fun, but they lead to the next stories where you built character or you had some experience that helped you grow. When it comes to stories and being a ghostwriter, I would imagine you're quite often working with other people's stories and trying to put them in a format that makes sense.
Yes, we'll get factual for a minute, not writing about the dead. As a ghostwriter, I help other people write their stories. If they literally don't want to type them out, I interview people and I take the transcripts and I work from the transcripts to write their story in their voice. Or sometimes people want to do the writing themselves, but they'd like a little help with that and a little accountability. Yeah. So we work together on that. I believe everyone has a story to tell because we learn from stories. We learn from our own, just as you mentioned, and we learn from each other's. We learn from stories more easily than we do textbooks. my most interesting subjects in college, the textbooks still put me sound asleep in 5 minutes.
Right. Yes.
So when I want to learn about something, I read biographies or autobiographies because that's what it's really. It's not the academic version of what it should be like.
Yeah.
This is what it's like to get up at 4 o'clock every morning and pray for 3 hours because I've decided that I want to be a Kundalini master. So the textbook's going to make it sound a little more dull and a little more acceptable. It was 40 degrees that morning and the wind was out of the southeast and it started to rain and I had 2 more hours to go on the prayer. Do I really want to do this?
Right. It brings you into the mind, and you talk a lot about the emotions that are going on within someone to really bring it to the reader how that story is going down.
Even when we're working on business books, there's emotion because people are recalling their past. Even if they think they're working on a business book and I'm going to tell people how to do this and we're going to talk about blockchain and all those other exciting things and Bitcoins, they're looking to their past and they're remembering, like, when I first started my business and our son was 3 years old and I took all my money and it was nearly the end of my marriage because I believed so much in this, but now we live in $1 million mansion, the marriage is better,
right,
and the kid's grown and can go to a good college. They're recalling all of these things. And again, the story helps the individual telling it because it brings us back. It reminds us what we've learned, how we felt.
Where they've been, how much they've grown.
Yeah. And it helps someone else entering that path or midway in the journey know that they're facing a similar thing. Someone else got through this. I can too.
Yeah. You are the most famous author no one's ever heard of.
Exactly. Let's keep it that way.
Okay. You don't dish the dirt on what books you really wrote. So that's what a ghostwriter is all about.
I stay in the background. I have non-disclosure agreements with all my clients, whether they want them or not. I said, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
I don't name names. I might regale a story at a cocktail party, but I never give the name. I let people guess which politician that was who said this to me.
Okay.
And that's important to me. I don't kiss and tell. I don't type and tell.
Don't type and tell. No typing, no telling.
Because people need to feel comfortable with me. In the process of doing this work, things come out. I go, let's not put that in the book.
Sure.
It's a fiduciary relationship. And when we work on books together, we can work together for 1.5 years. And you're telling your deepest, darkest secrets sometimes without being aware because we know how we get when we're talking. Like,
yeah. We're going to redact that part.
Yes. The famous redaction. People need to feel comfortable that they can trust me and I really won't hold it against them later for vast sums of cash.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just be kind to me and remember me in your will.
Good point. Have you ever run across people who feel like they don't have a story and after a few minutes of talking to them, they realize, oh my gosh, I do. I just never really put it together that way.
Absolutely. For me, that's an exciting part of my work because humans tend, many of us, not everyone, we tend to minimize our achievements and our experiences. Many years ago, I worked for a community newspaper, which I loved that. That was fantastic. And as such, you interview basically the people who buy ads in the newspaper. You write articles about them. But it's very hometown. And I don't need to be Woodward and Bernstein, my heroes, by the way. So I was interviewing a doctor one time, and he was just dry as toast. I'm an eye, ear, nose, and throat guy, and my office hours are 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. It's like... I know it's a very useful thing. People with allergies and adenoids, and eyes, ears, noses, and throats appreciate you. But it was the second or third phone call before he said, once a month, I fly out of the country and I go to impoverished areas and I do surgery for free on children who've never heard before.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, tell me more. This
There's
is awesome.
a thing we could talk about.
Yes. You speak up about this. This is wonderful. You are not bragging. You're letting people know that there is help for people like this. You're encouraging other people that it's possible to go and help. Yeah, tell me more. So the person who
Who was
dismissed this.
Sure. Before, he was just open from 8 to
Yeah,
3.
it's like, ain't different. Except on the weeks when I'm flying halfway across the world
Sure, to help
to
folks
do
who,
humanitarian aid. Did I mention that?
to bring miracle cures to people, basically.
That's serious. He was doing work that's serious. Just modesty is nice. I
Yeah.
like that. And it has its place. And again, reasons why I encourage people to tell your story. Somebody else can be helped by it.
Yes, and that's the whole point I'm here doing this interview anyway, is I think that someone could hear this and say, you know what, I really have been wanting to tell my story. I've been through a lot of stuff, and I've come out on the other side with a lot of wisdom. I would like to share that wisdom. And I would also imagine that you get a fair amount of people who think, oh gosh, I do have a story. I've been through some stuff. I have a lot of wisdom, but I'm not unique. A lot of people have been through that, and they've probably written a book. And why does someone need to hear my perspective on it? What do you say to those folks?
Let's see. We are currently in the year 2024. The Bible was written a few years ago.
Just a few.
Just a few years ago. And yet every year there are more books written about interpretations of Scripture.
Good point.
And to expand on that a little bit, everyone has a different take. It will speak to a different audience because every author, every storyteller has a different voice. Think back to teachers you had in school. Some of them you vibed with and you were hanging on every word.
Yeah.
Others are like, oh, okay, let me just get through this lecture. And if I study really hard, I'll get a passing grade. So different voices speak to people in ways that individual can understand. You might read 4 different authors talking about the same subject, but one of them is going to set you on fire. So when people say, there've already been 20 books written about this, like, you haven't written one. Somebody's going to identify with you. Maybe all the other books were written by 35-year-old guys who had a certain degree, but you are a 27-year-old single mother who didn't finish your degree yet. You're so freaking brilliant. You went out there, you invented this app, and you're doing marvelous things.
I love the power of perspective because everyone has a perspective that few other people have because they are them. When it comes to stories, one thing I noticed when working on my first book, which came out 11 years ago now. So it was about my life as a wedding photographer. And I wrote the book because whenever I met someone new, they asked me what I did for a living, as they do. And I said, I'm a photographer. I didn't specify what kind. And they said, oh, you mean like weddings? And I rolled my eyes quietly.
That's a skill.
I know.
Put that on your resume.
Tell me about it. I've gotten pretty good. So just beware, anyone. I would say yes, I'm a wedding photographer. Or I would not say I am a wedding photographer. I've been careful about that. I would say I do photograph weddings. And they would say, oh my gosh, they would just launch right into, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen? You must see some wild stuff. And I got to thinking about it, and I thought in the beginning of my career, I did, if I compare it to what I was doing at that time. And so I started writing things down, just recollections, memories. And it was one of those situations where I thought, okay, I know what happened because I was there. The stories created itself. I didn't have to, from my imagination, craft this story because it wasn't fiction. But when I really started writing down the stories, I realized that they were just ridiculously boring because they happened to me. I saw them, I witnessed them, and I could tell what happened. But as like you said before, until you bring that emotional part, which was not that was not my first language. When it came to writing, I could tell all about the details and what the place looked like and give descriptions, but bringing the reader in and giving them a sense of how everything felt to be there, so foreign.
The emotional aspect, because you're right, we tend to give the facts, but just as you were describing this morning, like, where are we? What are we doing? We're sitting on a cold slab, and I've got a bony butt, and it's like, I'm like shifting to the side
shifting,
here.
Yeah, definitely I've shifted about 4 or 5 times now.
And it's little things like that. Those are not the facts, but people can go, oh, yeah.
Been there.
I know what that feels like. And that chill goes all the way up through your body. And it's things like, Yeah, I told you I was walking on the way up here to meet you. I ran into a tree. I walk up and I go, do I have twigs in my hair? Because that wouldn't be the first time. And I took the long way because we refused to walk on any graves. We could have cut through and gotten to you much sooner, but like, no, we have to walk around the graves because that's a thing.
Yes.
So it's those little extra things that the reader can identify with. How often when people are giving facts do they talk about what did the room smell like? It's those extra things. And that olfactory trigger can make the scene come alive. Did you go visit your grandmother? Did she like to cook? Was there always something on the back of the stove when you got to her house? You could smell the biscuits and fried chicken.
And I bring that up because a lot of times if someone does realize they have a story in them, and they want to tell that story, and then they read through it, or they have someone they know and trust read through it, and they're like, yeah, I guess it's great. I remember the first draft of my manuscript I showed someone. I felt comfortable from the literary point of view looking at it, and he said, the material's interesting, but it's like you're telling me about it. I want you to show me.
Exactly.
And there's always that thing, show, don't tell. I didn't know what that meant because I'm not a writer, and I have to say, something that fascinates me so much. We've got, in the English alphabet, we've got 26 letters. We've got a handful of symbols, punctuation marks, and just the millions and millions of stories and books that come out of just throwing those combinations and telling those stories. If you think about it, we have a really limited set of tools to work with. But when you put them in a certain combination, it's infinite. So it
you just
sort of
drew
blows my
the
mind.
most beautiful picture in my mind, because when you were talking about that, over here in this corner, I saw letters beautifully tumbling over each other, multicolored letters in a serif face.
Yes, I do like that.
Caps and lower cases in this gentle, beautiful tumble. It was like a waterfall of letters. It was just beautiful when you said, look at all we can do with 26 letters and some punctuation.
And I'm
heavy, man.
I've just been fascinated by that. And I'm so glad as a visual person, you visualize them in a serif font because we're keeping it classy that way.
That's us.
Yeah, that's how we do. Martinis at 9 a.m. It's 9:35 now.
Okay.
I think Conrad would
The
be
bar is
proud.
open.
Yeah, the bar is open. I think Conrad would be very
And
proud of
Savannah,
us.
I don't think the bar ever closes.
It doesn't, not at all. When I first saw your information and it said ghostwriter, I thought, okay, I knew that existed. And I know what the use case would be if you are someone who wants to get a story out there and you need that level of help. What I'm curious about is I think a lot of people are, but I know I am really guilty of romanticizing what it is to be a full-time writer. I imagine that when you leave here, you're going to put on a really flamboyant hat and go into your abandoned lighthouse. And
Are you psychic?
I don't.
This is crazy.
Okay.
You are not too far off.
Oh my God, this is okay. What?
Okay. Last night, my friend and I went out to dinner. We're driving home. It's late at night. We're looking at the moon because it's stunning and magical.
It was great. It was full moon last night.
And we said, I bet that's gorgeous from the ocean. Let's just keep driving past the house, drive down to the ocean and look at the moon. And we do. We drive as far as the road goes without, my vehicle isn't four-wheel drive, so we stopped before the surf. And we wound up at a lighthouse. Like, we've never been at a lighthouse at night. That's when you should see them. They're best at night because the light's going. So I was at a lighthouse last night.
Okay.
And as far as the hats, I am a proud member of the Hat Ladies of Charleston.
Oh, wow.
At one point, I had more than 100 hats. I moved recently.
Right.
And I gave 40 of them to a theater company. So I do have a little problem with hats. But I don't typically wear them when I write.
Okay. I haven't
But
been
hats
stalking
and
you.
No, you've been professional. That's not stalking. You saw the pictures.
I didn't see the pictures. No. This is my thing in my head, and that's where
So
I'm
you
going
are
with it.
psychic.
I don't know if I'm
She wears
psychic.
hats and goes to lighthouses.
I just thought that's what writers do.
Mm.
And I thought that's how you get your mojo. That's how you get your inspiration. And I'm sure that's so far off base.
Clearly not.
But my real question is, how do you keep up the momentum and the stamina? You're typically working with other people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got some maybe bones to work with. But how do you keep up that writing pace and produce the kind of work you would have to do to create a book in a year and a half for someone. It took me 7 years to write mine, but it wasn't full time, obviously, so a little different. But how do you keep that pace?
It's a love for what I do mostly,
Yeah.
and a complete belief in my authors. I become so fond of my authors. They're like my children, even when sometimes they're older than I am. Because when we finish, I have to gently kick them out of the nest. But I love what I'm doing so much. So that's a big motivator. And it does require self-discipline. You should be self-employed. And my background in advertising gave me a very serious fear of deadlines.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. So when there's a deadline looming, I can reach very deep within myself to creativity and which bills I need to pay that month.
Right.
Not all of it is storybook picturesque. Some of it is, I need to invoice on the first.
Sure. Sure. I know there's the business part, but also I'm sure you've told really similar stories in very different ways. So if you've got a business book.
Oh, this is a good question.
And then they're really successful with it. And then the next CEO who happened to be at a cocktail hour with that person and said, oh, you got to go call Maggie.
Yeah, my name does get passed around, which I love, but it gets whispered because we can't say we used a ghostwriter, but other two people.
They'll probably say, she helped me edit it.
And that's fine. I don't need the credit. Yeah. So, I am my own whisper campaign. How do you make them different?
How do you go about making them different, but also keeping yourself interested in the work that you're putting out there?
It goes back to the stories. You could take two CEOs in the same industry, and they have different stories, and they have different viewpoints. They have different management styles, and that's what keeps it interesting. And that's why you can have many books on the same topic.
Okay. We've got stories, but then there's also tone and voice.
Yes.
Yes. And that's where the stuff gets exciting.
This is a fun challenge. This is one of the things we work together with when we first start the book, the authors and I. We do Zoom calls like everybody now does Zoom calls, which is great. I do my professional research that you call stalking to find out a little bit about them. Sometimes there are pre-existing video clips of them, and then I listen to the way they speak, which part of the country they live in or have spent time in.
Right.
We want to keep the flavor of that because, again, we don't want them to sound like a textbook. They need to sound like themselves. Specifically what I'm thinking of, I know this darling person. He's a great character, and he drops at least one F-bomb every sentence. When we first met and started talking about his book, I said, I'm not cleaning that up. I might remove some of them. We don't need 20. 3 might get the point across, but I'm not taking those out because all the people who know you would say, he didn't write this book. Where's the cussing?
Right.
So I try to get the voice, the regional things people say, because your book can still be professional when you say things like, we were trying to raise capital and I was as busy as a one-arm paper hanger. You still have a lot of factual information in there. You're clearly a successful CEO, but you say one-arm paper hanger.
Right.
We keep those things. We don't clean them up.
You're like, no, that's this person. That raises a question for me, though. How many times do you turn in something or start reviewing with someone something and you pretty much nailed their voice and they say, nah, I feel like I really need to tone it down. I feel like that's too much me. And I feel like maybe that won't play well with...
They don't think it's too much them.
Okay.
They don't think it's them at all. Like, I don't sound like...
Yeah.
I rarely get that. The funniest one, I love this because I do believe in the philosophy of letting someone save face. It's graceful and it's courteous. I was working with a woman. She was describing, and it was pertinent to the story, what she ate that night.
Okay.
I have it on a transcript. And I used the exact thing she said she ate that night. Because if it's pertinent, I'm going to get this exactly.
Right.
And I send off the first draft of that chapter to her. And she was incensed. I would never eat that. And I didn't say, girlfriend, I got it on tape. I went, oh, okay. What did you have? Let me fix that.
Let's edit your life real quick for this story.
Yeah, so you were eating vegan and not Big Mac. Got it. And I'm fine with that. Because
Sure.
I like to present people in their best light when possible.
And also, I guess, ultimately, they are going to put their name on the front of the book and have to own all of the information in it.
Yes. So I try to give things the most positive spin to make it helpful, because I'm also thinking about the reader, make sure that they get something out of it. There have been occasions when I had to sit back and say, I've got to let him sound like him and let the reader judge for themselves, because I won't change the story. If somebody's a real SOB, they might need to sound like that. I learned this lesson from a friend of mine. He was so wise. I've got to call him up and go, I learned from that. I'm carrying that story with me. I was working with an author who was very fear-based, very fire and brimstone.
Okay.
Which is not how I am at all. I am very hopeful.
You had to channel some different energy.
And I was saddened by the message that was coming through. And I was telling my friend about this without mentioning names, because half the time I don't remember them anyway.
I get that.
Yeah. And so I said, I'm torn by this, because now I am taking part in sending out a negative message. And he said, you can still be doing people a favor, because they'll read that book and go, this is awful. I'm not going to follow that path. And I went, oh, you're right. Let the guy look like the guy. And somebody can still learn.
100%.
You are not going to burn in hell for wearing that miniskirt.
Yeah. Cautionary tale.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I like that.
He and I worked on more books together, and his last book was all about hope. I came to really care for this guy. I could understand where he was coming from, and I have the fondest memories, but it started out with a little fear.
Sure. And it sounds like...
and I was glad he didn't have my home address.
Wow, it sounds like a 180. He had to go through some more life before he
my gosh.
came to where he
I'm truly fond
ended
of
up.
this person. All the people I have worked with who have different viewpoints than I do, I took them on intentionally, and it's of great value to me, because it helps me work on my ego, my compassion, judgmental, because you need to put that stuff aside when you're serving somebody else. And I don't want to say, oh, I'm perfect, look at me. Can you see my halo? That's not just the sun rising over the tombstone.
The sun is hitting the back of your head beautifully and lighting up your,
Oh, you planned it that way.
Yeah, a little bit.
I work on that stuff every day, and my authors help me with that.
Yeah, that's good. If someone's listening right now, thinking,
many someones, you have a huge following.
It's gonna balloon.
Coming up.
I walk around with this shirt. I had it on yesterday, and I don't have it on today, but it's got the QR code for the podcast. And people will just stop me randomly. They get curious because...
I love that.
And so they'll scan my shirt and go to the podcast, and that's really fun. When
I would look, see, you can get away with that.
Yeah,
I would
that would be...
Scan my QR code. Really? That is not ladylike. Let me just say that.
We do
for
want to
the
keep
people
things
who
classy.
don't have the visuals.
Right.
Let me just say that was bawdy. But because of the weather, I am covered like an Amish woman.
Yeah,
like from the chin down to my toes.
Yeah, that breeze is whipping up now at this point.
I have 14 layers on.
Wow. Well,
And no QR code, but I love that story.
Yeah. Well, if someone is listening and they want to connect with you and find out more, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Email. Yeah, I'm happy to give that out, because I offer free 30 minutes with people, answer any questions, give them an idea. Not everybody needs to work with me. They might have a conversation with me and decide, you know what, I want to go off and do this on my own. And I say, hey, here are 14 resources. I'm all for it. Please do this. You know where to find me if you have questions. You need to have a good relationship. It's like choosing a doctor or a therapist. Not that I'm of that level. We do have...
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of therapy that happens in that process.
Oh, yeah.
I would imagine, because I can see myself doing this, I would imagine that they have that 30 minutes and they say, oh, yeah, I've got this. Thank you for the resources. Here I go. Watch me go. And they get a year down the road and they've got maybe 5 pages written. And they're thinking, oh, my gosh, this is excruciating. I don't know how anyone does this. Everything I've written so far sucks, and I need Maggie. And they call you back up and say, okay, I believe you now. Those resources were wonderful. Thank you. I just can't make it happen myself. So let's work together. And you've talked a little bit about that process. Typically takes 1.5 years, it sounds like, and you go through different parts. There are a lot of interviews. Is there anything else that someone would anticipate in the process of working with you? Sounds like a lot of Zoom calls and reflection, probably.
I tell people, the minute you think, I want to write a book, hold on to that dream. It will happen one day. You can do it. Publishing has changed so much. We have adaptive technology so that people with all kinds of communications differences have the tools to do this and make it happen. I also say, keep all your notes. If you write a blog, keep all of those. Keep a journal. If you're going through something difficult in your life, keep your journal, because you will always refer back to this. Write everything down, whether you like to write longhand or type it or put it in a voice recorder. Keep everything.
Okay.
Because you want that resource material, because we all know what it's like. We have this wonderful experience, and then we think back on it. Which street was that? Which friend was with me that night? Right. So you'll be glad that you have that to reflect on. Even if you're not writing, keep your source material.
That's really good advice, because that's something that helped me with that first book. That book really started taking off in terms of filling in the details and the chapters and everything when the iPhone came out. And this is really silly, but it was a book about all the crazy stuff I'd seen at weddings. It was super helpful when I was at a wedding with my camera in hand. If something wild went on, I just wrote it down as a note on my phone so I could reflect back to it later. And sometimes they were things I'd totally forgotten, because I would be going through the notes and say, oh yeah, that did happen. I didn't dream that. That
really happened.
That seemed too crazy to really happen in real life, but no, it really did, because I wrote it down and then I had that to reflect on, and then I would fill in the details as I recalled the story. That was super helpful. So it was the years before that I had to really scratch my head and think, okay, what was it? How did that come together? How did all of those things happen? I remembered the impression or the essence, the bones of the story, I guess, but not the details.
And you bring up some really good points there about keeping notes in the moment. A couple of authors have decided, I'm not going to go through with writing that book. And we can go into that if you want later. But I still recommend keeping all the details, even if you never publish. Even if you write the book and decide, I can't hit the button at the last minute and go live with this, you still have a record of everything that you can reflect on, and it's a legacy. Because if you have children, family, friends, you leave a legacy, whether you have kids or not, even if it's other people in your industry. Keep all of the notes. That is your legacy. Even if no one else ever reads it, it could have meaning to you. And for those of us who do have family and children, we start to forget the good stories. Both of my parents are gone now. My grandparents are gone. And I'm already thinking, oh my gosh, I can't pick up the phone and call mom and ask her which aunt was that who was married to the preacher, but he was in jail when she conceived their second child. Which aunt was that?
There's a story.
So keep it if you never use it. And another point that you make me think about this, because I read your show notes, I read the descriptions, not that I'm a stalker, but I've read what you've already written, and you're an incredible writer. You are so good.
It's just a lot of pressure now.
And there are other people out there who have a natural ability to write, and they don't go forth with the book, but they are wise enough to know, I need to be held accountable. Even if someone's a really good writer, and they know they're a really good writer, it's okay. Acknowledge your skills. I have people come to me going, okay, can we meet twice a month? And
you're right.
Because they'll see that look of disappointment on my face if they don't turn in their chapter.
If you have a story, I won't say it's no good, but no one else is going to benefit if you don't get that story out somehow.
Exactly.
Sometimes that's not necessarily a book. Sometimes that is a blog. Sometimes that is short stories or whatever your style is. But definitely it is good to get that out, whether that's your kids, your family, your community, your industry. Sometimes your industry needs your perspective, because there are people who just have insights that you don't know where that came from. And then you learn they got that insight from a completely unexpected source.
I should stop shaking my head because we're audio. She shakes her head in agreement, and the look of admiration in her eyes for the words of wisdom he's just dropped on us.
That'll be the opening scene. No, that'll be the closing scene. This has been so fun. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for coming out and shivering with me.
You can see I'm shivering.
Oh, I'm shivering too. I'm just trying to keep it on the down low. And I can't
We're
even.
professionals. We're not uncomfortable.
Not at all. We're like that guy in the hurricane where he's trying to stay upright and he's doing his best.
I did that
Bless
one
him.
night. I stayed in Charleston through the hurricane. We had a business downtown and a second floor apartment. And I went, this is gorgeous. I need to go outside and take video of this. And I wrapped myself around the column on the porch.
Gosh. They found you 3 days later, drifting in the,
Hurricane parties are the best. But yeah, I thought, okay, if I don't die, this is a great story. So much of my life has been like that. I've literally run into a burning building. What was I thinking? If I don't die, what do I do now? I'm on the second floor. The firemen are running past me. Now I got to get out.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
So
There
the
was a
time.
reason I did that, and it wasn't altruistic. I wasn't saving kittens.
Okay.
I was working with a photographer carrying his gear.
No way.
And he ran into the building, and I'm a loyal person. I ran after him. And then on the second floor, I went, girl, you are nuts.
Yeah, what?
You're not even dating this guy. Like, you don't need to be that nice.
Yeah. Just time to bail. It's
But
time
look,
to get out.
I'm here.
Hopefully he's insured and you got out. So that was smart. But it's a great story.
I know. And I forget about that until we start talking. Yeah, I really did do that. And look, I'm alive to tell it. A bunch of friends were visiting last year and we were playing games. And the game was, if you wrote your autobiography, what would the title be?
Okay.
Of course, I can only remember my own because I'm not a good friend. And mine was, I didn't see that coming.
Maggie, thank you so much for being a part of this joyful rebellion here on this
It is
beautiful March day.
joyful.
It is.
The sun is higher in the sky now.
Yeah, the clouds are coming in. It's getting colder, though.
Yeah, I think so.
The sun went away for a few minutes.
It was embarrassed.
I guess so.
It adds to the atmosphere.
It's still bright out here, but gosh, that wind. We'll wrap it there. Thank you so much.
You. It's been wonderful.
It has been a fun story within a story that
Within another
was
story.
brought on by
With a speck of
someone
truth
else's
here and
book.
there.
Yeah.
Let's hope we can encourage somebody. Like, if she can get published, okay, I got a chance.
Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll cut it right there. Thanks so much for joining me today. And if you have an extra minute, I have a favor to ask. Some of you listen to this show on Apple Podcasts, and a lot of you I talk to are on Spotify or Amazon. I'd love it if you would take just a second to leave a rating or a review. It lets the platforms know that listeners are getting value from the show and suggest it to others who are interested in similar content. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a guest suggestion, or just general feedback, I'd love to hear about that too. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at ajoyfulrebellion.com.